The heavy oak door of Mr. Albright's office felt like a threshold between two lives, the one I shared with Arthur and the desolate, uncertain path stretching before me. 3 weeks. It had only been 3 weeks since Arthur's sudden passing, and already the world felt fundamentally shifted, its colors muted, its sounds muffled. I sat across from Mr. Albright, his kind eyes reflecting a pity I found difficult to bear. In my trembling hands, I clutched the deed to the Riverside Apartments, a property Arthur had owned for decades. It was now mine, a legacy both comforting and daunting. The will had been simple, straightforward. Everything to me, his wife, Eleanor. Before I could even begin to process the weight of the parchment in my grip, the office door burst open. The sudden violent interruption sent a jolt through my grief-numbed body. Bethany, Arthur's daughter-in-law, stood framed in the doorway, her face a mask of contorted rage I had never witnessed before. Her cheeks were flushed and angry red, her eyes wild with an accusation that instantly drained the fragile peace from the room. She was practically spitting fire, her gaze fixed on me as if I were a venomous snake. "This is disgusting, Eleanor," Bethany spat, her voice laced with venom, cutting through the silence of the solicitor's office like a shard of glass. "Absolutely disgusting. You manipulated Arthur into leaving you everything. How could you?" The words hung in the air, thick with accusation, a brutal assault on my already fractured heart. I stared at her, utterly bewildered, my mouth agape. Manipulation? Arthur and I had been married for over 20 years, a bond built on quiet understanding and unwavering support. The thought of me manipulating him, especially regarding his will, was ludicrous, deeply offensive. Confusion mixed with a searing heartbreak. Stung by her unprecedented venom, I could only shake my head slightly, unable to form a coherent response. Her anger felt disproportionate, baseless, a cruel twist in the already unbearable aftermath of Arthur's death. She had always been polite, if a little distant, but this raw hostility was foreign, terrifying. It felt like another loss, another unexpected wound carved into my already fragile state. "We are cutting all ties," Bethany declared, her voice firm, leaving no room for argument or explanation. "You won't hear from us again." The finality of her words echoed in the sudden silence that followed as she slammed the door shut with a resounding thud that rattled the framed degrees on Mr. Albright's wall. The reverberation seemed to shake my very core, leaving me utterly shattered, feeling as though the last vestiges of my family connection to Arthur's children had just been severed. Mr. Albright offered a sympathetic glance, but his silence underscored the unbridgeable chasm Bethany had just created. Later that evening, back in the quiet, echoing solitude of my home, Bethany's words replayed in my mind like a broken record. "Greedy old woman." The phrase burrowed deep, igniting a defensive fire within me, battling against the lingering grief and confusion. Was I greedy? I had loved Arthur unconditionally. We built a life together. The inheritance wasn't about greed, it was about survival, about securing the future Arthur had always promised me. It was about trust, his final act of care. I spread the inheritance papers across the dining table, the crisp documents a stark contrast to the emotional chaos swirling inside me. The Riverside Apartments. The name on the deed now held a different weight. Initially, it had represented security, a tangible asset to help me navigate widowhood. Arthur had always been a meticulous planner, a man who believed in providing. This building, I thought, was his final provision, a way to ensure I wouldn't struggle. It felt like a promise whispered from beyond the grave. My resolve hardened. I would not let Bethany's cruel words define me, nor would I allow Arthur's legacy to crumble. I would manage this building, honor his memory, and secure my future. 2 days later, armed with a determined spirit and a sense of duty, I made my way to the Riverside Apartments. My initial optimism, however, quickly deflated. The building stood like a weary sentinel on a less than picturesque street, its brick facade faded and stained, windows grimy, a few panes visibly cracked. Graffiti marred one side, and the general air of neglect was palpable. It was far from the polished, well-maintained property I had envisioned. This was not the gleaming asset I had implicitly believed Arthur possessed. Inside, the ground floor office was a testament to disorganization and neglect. Dust motes danced in the slivers of sunlight that pierced the grimy window panes. Stacks of yellowing papers teetered precariously on an ancient, scarred desk. There were filing cabinets, certainly, but they seemed to have been abandoned to the passage of time, their contents a jumbled mess. I spent hours sifting through decades of haphazardly kept records, my fingers growing grimy with dust, a growing sense of unease settling in my stomach. The meticulous Arthur I knew seemed to be entirely absent from these chaotic surroundings. Then I found it, a worn ledger tucked beneath a stack of old utility bills. As I painstakingly flipped through the brittle pages, a name caught my eye, Lucas Miller, apartment 4B, and next to his name, a chilling, consistent pattern of zeros in the rent-paid column. My eyes scanned back, then forward, disbelief warring with growing dread. 8 years. Lucas Miller hadn't paid a single cent of rent in 8 consecutive years. My heart pounded as I did the quick mental math, consulting the monthly rental rate noted on another sheet. The total was staggering, utterly incomprehensible. Over $76,000 in unpaid rent. The ledger slipped from my numb fingers, clattering softly onto the desk. Why? Why would Arthur, a man whose practicality bordered on obsessive, a man who balanced his checkbook to the penny, allow such a monumental sum to go uncollected? This wasn't just a missed payment. This was an outright financial hemorrhage. The question gnawed at me, a sharp, insistent pain. It made no sense. It violated every principle I knew Arthur to live by. Suddenly, Arthur's recent stress, his quiet anxieties, the subtle ways he had been tightening our household budget over the past few years, it all clicked into place with a horrifying clarity. The Riverside Apartments, far from being a secure legacy, was a financial disaster. This $76,000 black hole, coupled with the apparent overall neglect of the property, explained Arthur's burdens. The lines of worry etched deeper into his face during his final months. He had carried this immense weight alone, silently, perhaps trying to fix it before it overwhelmed us both. A wave of profound sadness washed over me, tinged with a newfound understanding of the silent struggles my husband had faced. The inheritance was not just a gift. It was a burden, a mystery, and a silent plea for rescue. With a stack of freshly printed eviction notices clutched in my hand, I returned to the Riverside Apartments 2 days later, a cold knot of resolve tightening in my stomach. The initial shock of finding the debt had morphed into a steely determination. I had to face this head on. My knees protested with every creaking step as I ascended the 4 flights of stairs to apartment 4B. The building's neglect was even more pronounced inside. Chipped paint, dimly lit hallways, and the lingering scent of damp earth and stale cooking. Each step felt heavy, burdened not just by the physical effort, but by the weight of the unknown. My heart hammered against my ribs as I finally stood before the door marked 4B. Taking a deep breath, I raised my hand and knocked, the sound echoing hollowly in the quiet hallway. The wait felt interminable, a lifetime compressed into a few seconds. Then the door creaked open. A man in his early 40s stood before me. He was of medium height, with a lean build and intelligent eyes. And those eyes, they were Arthur's eyes. The same shade of deep forest green, framed by the same fine lines at the corners, holding a similar, quiet intensity. My breath hitched in my throat. It was an uncanny resemblance, a startling echo of the man I had just buried. A wave of dizziness washed over me, threatening to buckle my knees. "You must be Eleanor," the man said, his voice gentle, unexpectedly calm. "I've been expecting you." His words, delivered without a hint of surprise or hostility, completely disarmed me. My carefully constructed resolve wavered. I had anticipated anger, perhaps defiance, certainly not this serene acceptance. He stepped back, inviting me in with a gesture of his hand. I hesitated, still trying to reconcile his presence, his eyes, with the Lucas Miller who owed Arthur $76,000. But the interior of the apartment was another surprise. Far from the squalor I might have expected from a non-paying tenant, it was surprisingly clean, even homey. The air was filled with the subtle scent of cinnamon and old books. Sunlight streamed through a large, clean window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air and falling on framed photographs that adorned every available surface. They were family photos, candid snapshots of holidays and birthdays, of children growing up, laughter frozen in time. A warmth radiated from the apartment that was at odds with the dilapidated exterior of the building. I stepped inside, still clutching the eviction notices, feeling foolishly unprepared for this encounter. My voice, when I finally found it, was a little shaky. "Mr. Miller," I began, trying to regain my professional footing. "I'm here about your rent. You haven't paid in 8 years. The amount is substantial." He nodded slowly, his green eyes still holding that unsettling familiarity. "Please call me Malcolm," he said, gesturing to a comfortable-looking armchair. "And yes, I'm well aware of the situation. I knew you'd come eventually." He then walked over to a small, antique coffee maker on a counter and started preparing 2 cups. "Can I offer you some coffee, Eleanor?" His composure was unnerving. "Malcolm," I repeated, trying to steady my voice, "I need to know why you haven't been paying rent. My husband, Arthur, was a very shrewd businessman. This simply doesn't make sense." The scent of brewing coffee began to fill the small living room, a strange comfort in a deeply uncomfortable situation. As he turned to pour the coffee, the way the light caught his profile, the slight tilt of his head, the shading, knowing look in his green eyes, it was Arthur. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The missing pieces of his face, the subtle nuances, were suddenly filled in, completing a picture I didn't want to see. He handed me a steaming mug, his fingers brushing mine briefly. The warmth was grounding, but my stomach still churned with an escalating sense of dread. "Your husband never told you about me, did he?" Malcolm asked, his voice soft, almost regretful. My stomach dropped. The cup felt suddenly heavy in my hand. What was he implying? What secret could Arthur have kept that involved this man, this uncanny resemblance? My mind raced, trying to grasp at any plausible explanation. A distant relative? A forgotten friend? But the way he said it, the knowing look in his eyes, spoke of something far more intimate, far more profound. Without waiting for my reply, Malcolm walked over to a small, cluttered bookshelf. He picked up a framed photograph, dusted it gently with his thumb, and handed it to me. I took the picture, my fingers still slightly, the photograph, clutched in my numb fingers, felt like a burning coal. A young Arthur, vibrant and beaming, with a woman I didn't know, Sofia Garcia, and a baby in her arms. A gold band glinted on Arthur's left hand, a ring I had never seen, certainly not the one he wore for me. My own wedding band, a simple platinum circle, felt impossibly heavy on my finger. A terrible, dawning realization began to bloom in the pit of my stomach, cold and sickening. 1982, Lucas, Malcolm stated softly, his voice cutting through the ringing in my ears. "That's my mother, Sofia Garcia, and that's me as a baby." The year echoed in my mind like a death knell. Arthur and I had been married for 3 years by then. 3 years of shared dreams, of building a home, of trying desperately, heartbreakingly, to conceive a child. While I was enduring countless doctor's appointments, the invasive tests, the crushing disappointments, Arthur had been posing for this picture. A baby in his arms, a different woman by his side wearing a wedding ring that wasn't mine. The world tilted on its axis. "I don't understand," I whispered, the words barely audible, though a terrible, inescapable understanding was already seizing me. My eyes darted from the photograph to Malcolm's face, searching for an explanation, a contradiction, anything that could undo what I was seeing, what I was feeling. Malcolm's face softened, his green eyes filled with a profound sadness that mirrored my own burgeoning grief. He gestured again to the armchair. "Please sit, Eleanor," he urged, his voice gentle. "This is going to be difficult to hear." I sank into the armchair, clutching my purse to my chest as if it were a shield against the truth I instinctively knew was coming. Malcolm sat opposite me, his gaze steady, and began to speak, weaving a narrative that systematically dismantled the foundation of my life. He spoke of Sophia, a vibrant young waitress at Mel's Diner, a place Arthur frequented for lunch near his office. He described the way Arthur had charmed her, how he had made her laugh. Malcolm recounted Arthur's words to Sophia, how he portrayed himself as a lonely man trapped in a marriage where his wife, Eleanor, worked constantly, a marriage fraught with problems. The casual cruelty of those words, spoken to a stranger about me, pierced me deeply. It was a calculated lie, designed to elicit sympathy, to pave the way for his deceit. My work had been a partnership, a contribution to our shared future, not a wedge. And our problems had been our shared heartache over our inability to have children, a pain I thought we faced together. My mother fell in love with him, Malcolm said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. And he told her he loved her too, said he was going to leave his wife and marry her. He paused, his gaze meeting mine, and I saw the ghosts of his mother's shattered dreams in his eyes. But he didn't, I interjected, my voice hollow, a mere breath. It wasn't a question, but a statement of the obvious, born of the bitter truth unfolding before me. My heart ached for Sophia, for the lie she had lived, for the hope that had been cruelly dangled before her. Malcolm confirmed my unspoken thought. No, he didn't. He recounted how Arthur had abandoned Sophia when she became pregnant, citing complications with his existing marriage that made it impossible for him to leave. The sheer audacity, the callousness of it, made me feel physically ill. While I was silently grieving our inability to conceive, while I was dreaming of the family we couldn't have, Arthur had not only fathered a child elsewhere, but had then callously discarded the woman who carried it. The irony was a punch to the gut, a betrayal that reached beyond the grave. Sophia, Malcolm explained, was left to raise him alone. Arthur would appear sometimes, a phantom father figure, bringing money and toys, always in cash, always with a carefully constructed excuse for his sporadic appearance. He was introduced to young Lucas as Uncle Arthur. The moniker hung heavy in the air, a grotesque masquerade. Malcolm's voice grew distinctly bitter now, an edge of raw pain entering his tone. Uncle Arthur, he repeated, the words dripping with sarcasm, who looked exactly like me. The resemblance, which had unsettled me earlier, now felt like a taunt, a cruel cosmic joke. How could I have been so blind? How could I have spent 20 years with a man who could compartmentalize his life with such ruthless precision? The story continued, each revelation a fresh wound. Sophia, Lucas's mother, died of cancer when he was just 8 years old. Arthur, still playing the part of the devoted family friend, paid for her funeral. He attended, offered condolences, and then, with the theatrical precision of a practiced liar, vanished from Lucas's life. After the funeral, Malcolm's voice broke, a raw, choked sound. I went into foster care. He looked away for a moment, his jaw tight, struggling to regain his composure. It wasn't easy, Eleanor. Not knowing who my father was, feeling like I was disposable. A wave of profound empathy mixed with my own burgeoning grief and rage washed over me. Oh God, I breathed, tears pricking my eyes. Malcolm, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I truly had no idea. The apology felt inadequate, but it was all I had. The scale of Arthur's deception, the depth of his cruelty, was simply staggering. It wasn't just a secret, it was a parallel life, a complete erasure of another family, another child. He nodded, acknowledging my words, though his gaze remained fixed on some distant point. He continued his story, his voice now steadier, laced with the resilience of someone who had survived immense hardship. At 18, Lucas, driven not by a desire for money or revenge, but by the fundamental human need to know his origins, tracked down Arthur. He found him through old records, through fragments of memories, through a sheer force of will. He simply wanted to meet his father. He panicked, Malcolm recounted Arthur's reaction, a mirthless laugh escaping him. Arthur panicked, told me that acknowledging me would destroy his marriage, destroy his life. He said it would ruin everything he had built. The selfishness of it was breathtaking. Arthur's primary concern had not been the son he had abandoned, but the fragile facade of his own carefully constructed existence. It was then, 8 years ago, that Arthur had offered Malcolm the apartment, rent-free, one room. It was a payoff, a way to keep him silent, hidden away in a dilapidated building. It was also, Malcolm admitted with a faint shrug, an opportunity. The stability allowed him to finally get his electrician's license, to build a life for himself after years of uncertainty. The arrangement was a twisted form of paternal support, tainted by the heavy price of secrecy. As Malcolm finished, The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Arthur had never intended to tell me about Lucas. He had taken this secret to his grave, leaving me to stumble upon it, piece by painful piece, like an archaeologist unearthing a forgotten, devastating truth. My husband, the man I loved, the man I mourned, was not the man I thought I knew. He was a stranger, a deceiver, a keeper of monstrous secrets. I pushed myself up from the armchair, the sudden movement of visceral need to escape the suffocating weight of Arthur's deception. My world, already fractured by grief, had now completely shattered, revealing a landscape of lies and unimaginable cruelty. I paced the small living room of apartment 4B, each step fueled by a burgeoning anger and a gnawing sense of disorientation. The man I had loved, the man I had mourned, was a stranger, a masterful deceiver who had woven an elaborate tapestry of untruths throughout his life. "And Bethany," I said, my voice tight, barely a whisper through the storm raging inside me. The question had been simmering beneath the surface, a chilling premonition. If Arthur could hide such a monumental secret, who else was privy to it? "Does she know about you?" Malcolm's face, which had been a mask of stoic sadness throughout his painful recounting, paled noticeably. His gaze dropped, avoiding mine, and he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The subtle change in his demeanor was all the answer I needed, yet I needed to hear it, to grasp the full extent of this sprawling deception. He hesitated, clearly weighing his words. "Eleanor," he began, his voice low, "there's something you should look for in your husband's wallet." He paused, taking a breath. "There's a hidden compartment behind his driver's license. Arthur always kept important papers there." My mouth went dry. Arthur's wallet, the one I had laid carefully in his suit pocket before the funeral, a hidden compartment. "How do you know about that?" I asked, my voice barely a thread, a cold dread snaking its way through my veins. Only someone intimately familiar with Arthur, someone who had seen or been shown that specific private detail, would know. Malcolm met my gaze again, his green eyes filled with a mixture of regret and resignation. He took another deep breath, preparing himself for the next bombshell. "3 days before he died, your daughter-in-law came to see me," he revealed, the words dropping into the silence like stones. "Bethany, she's known about me for years." The air left my lungs in a ragged gasp. Bethany, the woman who had just days ago in Mr. Albright's office branded me a greedy old woman and severed all ties, knew about Arthur's illegitimate son. The rage that had been slowly building within me now erupted into a searing inferno. It was not just Arthur who had betrayed me. "She knew," I repeated, my voice rising, bordering on a shout. "And she said nothing? She came to you?" Malcolm nodded, his expression grim. "She said Arthur was too sick to manage the building, that he'd given her power of attorney to collect the rent money. She insisted you had approved the arrangement, that it was all above board." He then walked over to a small metal filing cabinet, pulled open a drawer, and extracted a folder. From it, he produced a series of bank statements and deposit slips. He laid them on the small coffee table between us. They were clearly marked, detailing regular deposits over the last several months, all made out to Bethany Vance. I stared at the documents, my mind reeling. The numbers, the dates, the name. It was undeniable. Bethany hadn't just known about Malcolm. She had actively involved herself in Arthur's secret, profiting from it. The $76,000 in unpaid rent that had so stunned me now had a name, a face. Bethany Vance. "Nearly $77,000, I whispered, the exact amount from my earlier calculation, my voice thick with a fresh wave of disbelief and betrayal. It wasn't just Arthur's lies I was uncovering. It was Bethany's calculated theft. And suddenly, her outburst in Mr. Albright's office, her accusations of my greed, her swift, dramatic declaration of cutting all ties. It all clicked into place. It wasn't about me manipulating Arthur. It was about her covering her own tracks, creating a smokescreen, making me the villain before I could discover her own avarice. "She played us both, Eleanor," Malcolm said, his voice quiet, resonating with a shared understanding of manipulation. She told me that you were a greedy old woman who would try to evict me the moment Arthur was gone. She said she was protecting me, protecting Arthur's wishes. She painted you as the villain, the one who would destroy everything. The coldness of Bethany's calculated cruelty was breathtaking. She had weaponized my grief, using Arthur's death as an opportunity to solidify her stolen gains and simultaneously poison Malcolm against me. She had deliberately set me up for this confrontation, ensuring I would appear heartless and grasping. The image of her furious face, her accusations, now took on a sinister new meaning. "There's more, isn't there?" I pressed, a new chill running down my spine. The extent of her deception felt too vast, too intricate, to end with just stolen rent money and planted seeds of discord. My intuition screamed that there was a deeper layer, a more insidious plot lurking beneath the surface. Malcolm hesitated again, his eyes darkening. He sighed, a heavy sound of resignation. "Last month," he confessed, "Bethany brought a man here, a real estate appraiser. He measured the apartment, asked about the building's condition, the structural integrity, renovation costs." My blood turned to ice. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, painting a picture of betrayal far grander than mere theft. The full scope of Bethany's Machiavellian plan slammed into me with sickening force. It wasn't just the rent, not just the manipulation. She was planning to destroy Arthur's last legacy, the place she knew held his secret son. "She's planning to sell," I stated, the words numb on my lips, but the realization searing through me. She wasn't just collecting rent. She was sizing up the property for liquidation, cutting Malcolm out of the picture entirely, eradicating any trace of Arthur's other life. And she was using Arthur's death, my grief, as the perfect cover. I left Lucas's apartment in a fog, the weight of the new revelations pressing down on me. The drive home was a blur of traffic and city lights, my mind fixed on one singular, urgent task. Arthur's wallet, the hidden compartment, the truth, the final pieces of this horrifying puzzle surely awaited me there. If you're as gripped by Eleanor's story as I am, and you want to see how she navigates these shocking betrayals and fights back against the lies, make sure to like this video, share it with someone who appreciates a powerful story, and subscribe to catch every emotional twist and turn. Your support helps bring these truths to light. The drive home was a blur, a tunnel vision of streetlights and passing cars, all converging on a single urgent point: Arthur's wallet. The revelation that Bethany had been collecting rent, that she had known about Malcolm for years, and most damningly that she was planning to sell the building, had ignited a cold fury within me. But beneath the anger, a deeper, more chilling question pulsed. What else had Arthur hidden? What ultimate truth did that wallet conceal? I found myself sitting on the edge of our king-size bed, the plush comforter feeling alien beneath my hands. Arthur's wallet, a familiar leather bifold he'd carried for years, rested in my palm. It felt heavier now, weighted not by money, but by the unseen burden of decades of deceit. My fingers traced the worn edges, the subtle indentations of use. A wave of nausea washed over me. This was the intimate possession of the man I had loved, the man whose secrets were now tearing my world apart. Hesitation gripped me. Once open, once revealed, there would be no going back. The last vestiges of the Arthur I thought I knew would vanish forever. But I couldn't unhear Malcolm's words, couldn't unsee the bank statements, couldn't ignore the unsettling truth of his green eyes mirroring Arthur's. I had to know. Taking a deep, trembling breath, I slowly opened the wallet. The usual array of credit cards, business cards, and a few faded photos of me and our family were there. My thumb slid under his driver's license, just as Malcolm had described, feeling for the subtle give of a hidden flap. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the quiet room. There, a small, almost imperceptible tab. I carefully lifted it, revealing a narrow, concealed pocket. My fingers, clumsy with anticipation and dread, fumbled inside. They closed around a small, folded piece of paper brittle with age. I pulled it out. It wasn't a document, but a photograph. My breath hitched. The image was faded but instantly recognizable. Sophia, Malcolm's mother, lay in a hospital bed, her face tired but radiant, a tiny, swaddled newborn nestled in her arms. And standing beside her, holding her hand, his gaze fixed on the baby with an expression of profound tenderness, was Arthur. It was a look I rarely saw, a raw, protective affection that sent a spear of pain through my chest. He wasn't just there, he was present, invested, openly loving. And on his left hand, shining unmistakably, was my wedding ring. The simple platinum band I had given him, the symbol of our shared life, was on his finger as he welcomed a child with another woman. The betrayal was so deep, so absolute, it stole the air from my lungs. My gaze dropped to the back of the photo. In delicate, looping script, a hand I now knew to be Sophia's had written, Lucas James Miller, born March 15, 1982, 7th Elab Forum, as he has your eyes. The date again, 1982. The year of my deepest yearning for a child, the year Arthur had given one to someone else while wearing my ring. The sheer audacity, the cold-blooded duplicity, was a poison seeping into every memory I had of him. Beneath the photograph, still nestled in the hidden compartment, was another, more official-looking document. A yellowed original birth certificate. I unfolded it with trembling hands. Lucas James Miller, it declared at the top, confirming the name and date. And then, under father's name, bold and clear, was Arthur James Vance. He had legally acknowledged paternity. He hadn't just had an affair, he had accepted the child, his name etched into official records. A permanent, undeniable tie. This wasn't just an affair, or a regrettable mistake, or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a sustained, deliberate choice. A meticulously constructed lie that spanned 41 years of my life, intertwining with my most vulnerable moments, my deepest pains. While I mourned our childlessness, Arthur had nurtured another family, a secret life, a son he covertly supported. The Arthur I knew, the kind, steady husband, was a phantom, an illusion. The real Arthur was a master manipulator, a betrayer of the highest order. The weight of his deception crushed me, leaving me gasping for air. Just as the full, horrifying scope of Arthur's betrayal settled upon me, my phone vibrated, startling me. I fumbled for it, my hand shaking. It was Daniel, Arthur's son from his first marriage, my stepson. My stepson, whose wife, Bethany, was now revealed to be a thief and a schemer. My throat tightened. I had barely seen Daniel or Joy since Arthur's funeral. Mom? Daniel's voice sounded strained, thick with an emotion I couldn't immediately place. We need to talk. A sudden memory resurfaced, sharp and clear. Joy, Daniel's wife, just a few days after the funeral, had called me, her voice dripping with false sympathy. She'd said Daniel was distraught, struggling, and that he didn't want to see anyone right now, especially not me, as it was too painful. She'd painted a picture of him needing space, wanting to be left alone. It had hurt at the time, confirming my fear that I was being pushed out of their lives. Now, hearing Daniel's voice, knowing what I knew about Bethany, and by extension, Joy, who often seemed to parrot Bethany's sentiments, Joy's words rang hollow, a deliberate fabrication designed to isolate me. Daniel, are you all right? I managed my voice raspy. No, Mom, I'm not. Look, can you come over tonight, please? And don't tell Bethany I called. His voice was urgent, laced with a plea that spoke volumes. The explicit instruction not to tell Bethany confirmed my suspicion that Joy had been acting on Bethany's behalf, or at least in complicity with her. Bethany's web of deceit stretched further than I had imagined, entangling even her husband, my stepson. I stared down at the birth certificate, the irrefutable proof of Arthur's ultimate lie, then at the photo of him, smiling tenderly at another woman and child, wearing my ring. Everything was unraveling. The man I had loved, the stepson I cared for, the daughter-in-law I had tolerated, all of them were caught in a tangled knot of secrets and lies, and I was at the very center of it, forced to untangle it all. The night air was crisp, doing little to cool the fire raging within me as I drove to Daniel and Bethany's house. The birth certificate, a flimsy piece of paper carrying the weight of decades of deceit, was clutched tightly in my hand, a silent weapon. My mind raced, piecing together the fragments of betrayal, forming a monstrous mosaic of Arthur's lies and Bethany's avarice. I was no longer just grieving. I was angry, a cold, calculated anger that demanded justice. Daniel opened the door, his face pale and etched with exhaustion. His eyes were shadowed, hinting at sleepless nights. He looked genuinely distressed, a stark contrast to the performative anger Bethany had displayed. He led me into the living room, the air thick with unspoken tension. "Mom, I'm so sorry about what happened at the lawyer's office," Daniel began, his voice strained, a genuine apology in his eyes. "Bethany was out of line. I tried to talk to her, but she was so convinced." I held up a hand, cutting him off. There was no time for pleasantries, no room for pretense. The urgency of the situation superseded any niceties. "Daniel, we have bigger problems than Bethany's temper," I stated, my voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. "Your wife was collecting rent from your father's building for 8 years. His brow furrowed, confusion clouding his features. "What are you talking about, Mom? Dad always handled the building. He just let me help sometimes." He looked genuinely bewildered, his denial convincing enough to make me pause. "No, Daniel," I clarified, my voice unwavering. "She was stealing the rent from a tenant named Lucas Miller. She knew about him, she knew he was paying, and she was intercepting the payments." I recounted the details Malcolm had shared, the bank statements, the deposit slips made out to Bethany Vance, the staggering total of $76,800. "He was paying, Daniel. Your wife was taking the money and letting Arthur think the tenant was skipping out." Daniel froze, his face draining of color. The color of his skin matched the beige walls around him. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, processing the enormity of the accusation. "Jesus, Mom," he finally managed, his voice barely a whisper, filled with genuine shock. "I had no idea. Bethany, she wouldn't, would she?" His eyes searched mine, pleading for me to contradict myself and to tell him it was all a mistake, but I couldn't. I reached into my bag and pulled out the crumpled birth certificate, placing it deliberately on the coffee table between us, its official weight radiating a silent, undeniable truth. "There's more, Daniel," I said, my voice heavy with the gravity of the revelation. "Your father had another son." Daniel's head snapped up, his gaze fixing on the document. His eyes widened as he read the name. Lucas James Miller. The date, March 15th, 1982. The father's name, Arthur James Vance. The age, 41. The tenant Bethany had allegedly stolen from. The realization hit him with a visible force, like a blow to the chest. He went even paler, clutching the edge of the table as if to steady himself. "Dad had an affair," I explained, my voice devoid of emotion, a cold, hard summary of the decades-long lie. "More than an affair, Daniel. He abandoned his son, then kept him a secret, supporting him in secret while letting me believe we couldn't have children." The words were blunt, raw, and full of the bitter truth. Daniel shook his head slowly, his mind clearly reeling from the double blow of his father's profound betrayal and his wife's shocking criminality. "I don't know anything about the rent collection," he repeated, his voice stronger now, tinged with anger. "But Bethany always seemed to have extra money, and she was always pushing Dad to update his will, saying it was old, outdated." He paused, a new horrifying realization dawning in his eyes. "She never meant for it to go to you, did she? Or even to me, not entirely." Another chilling piece of the puzzle slid into place. "What do you mean, Daniel?" I asked, a fresh wave of dread washing over me. He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair, his gaze distant, tormented. She talked to a lawyer a few months ago. She was asking about declaring Dad incompetent." His voice dropped to a whisper, filled with a horrified disbelief. "She wanted to challenge any will that didn't leave everything to me, or more accurately, to us. She kept saying you were manipulating a sick old man, that you were taking advantage of his fragile state." The words echoed Bethany's accusations in Mr. Albright's office, but now they took on a truly sinister hue. She hadn't just been trying to cover her tracks. She had been actively trying to undermine Arthur's will, to discredit me, to seize control of everything. Her claims of my greed were a projection of her own, a meticulously crafted narrative to justify her actions. "God, Mom," Daniel muttered, his voice thick with dawning horror. "What if she's been planning this all along? What if she just wanted to get rid of you entirely? As the horrifying question hung in the air, lights swung across the living room window, illuminating the driveway. The familiar sound of Bethany's car pulling in reached us. Daniel's eyes darted to the window, then back to the birth certificate on the table. He snatched it up, hastily folding it and tucking it under a cushion just as the front door handle rattled. The urgency of his movements spoke volumes about the fear he held for his own wife. Bethany entered, a bright, practiced smile on her face. It faltered almost immediately when she saw me sitting there. Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, a flicker of suspicion crossing her features. "Eleanor," she said, her voice a little too sweet, a little too forced. "What a surprise. Is everything all right?" She glanced from me to Daniel, her gaze sharp, searching for any hint of what we had discussed. I met her gaze, a cold determination solidifying within me. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing my pain. Not yet. "Actually, Bethany," I replied, my voice calm, almost conversational, "Daniel and I were just discussing the Riverside apartments." I watched her closely, specifically mentioning the tenant in apartment 4B. Her eyes flickered, just a fraction of a second, but it was enough, a tiny spark of fear, quickly masked, but undeniably there. She knew I was talking about Lucas. She knew. She forced a smile, a brittle facade. "Oh, that old place," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "Some people just take advantage of kindness, don't they? It's a shame Arthur let things slide so much." She rambled on, completely unaware that I knew the full, devastating extent of her deceit, that her carefully constructed world of lies was about to come crashing down. The morning after my tense encounter with Daniel and Bethany, I met Lucas at a quiet coffee shop on the outskirts of town. The aroma of roasted beans and warm pastries did little to soothe the churning anxiety in my stomach. The air, however, was filled with a sense of purpose, a steely resolve that had replaced the initial shock and grief. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Lucas, about justice, and about unraveling the intricate web of lies Arthur and Bethany had spun. I slid an envelope across the small table, nudging it towards Lucas. Inside were the faded hospital photograph of Arthur, Sophia, and newborn Lucas, and the yellowed birth certificate. "I found these in Arthur's wallet," I explained, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Lucas's fingers trembled slightly as he opened the envelope. He pulled out the photograph first, his gaze fixing on the image of his young mother, radiant with new motherhood, and Arthur, tenderly holding her hand, his eyes filled with a softness I had rarely seen. A tear tracked a path down his cheek. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Then he saw the platinum band on Arthur's finger. My wedding ring. The full weight of the scene hit him. He reached for the birth certificate, his eyes scanning the official words. "Arthur James Vance," he read aloud, his voice thick with emotion. "My father. He was there. He acknowledged me legally." He looked up at me, his eyes brimming. "Why, Eleanor?" he asked, his voice breaking, raw with decades of unanswered questions. "Why did he abandon us? Why did he keep me a secret?" The question hung heavy in the air, a testament to Arthur's deep, unforgivable flaw. "Because he was a coward, Lucas," I replied, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "He wanted to have it all, to live two lives, and he didn't have the courage to face the consequences of his actions. He took the easy way out, every single time." It was a harsh truth, but an undeniable one. I took a deep breath, pushing past the personal pain to focus on the immediate, practical matters. "Lucas," I continued, "this birth certificate changes everything. You are Arthur's legitimate son. Under the law, you are an heir. That means you are entitled to half of the Riverside apartments and half of all the money Bethany stole from you over the years." His eyes widened, reflecting a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Half?" he whispered, as if the concept was too grand to comprehend. "At least," I confirmed. "Now I need to ask you something vital. Did Bethany ever make you sign anything? Any documents related to the building or your tenancy, especially recently?" Lucas thought for a moment, then his brow furrowed in recollection. "Yes," he said slowly. "A few times over the last year or so. She called them lease amendments or property management changes. Said Arthur was getting too old to keep track of everything, and she was helping him streamline the process. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through his photos. I always take pictures of anything I sign, just in case. He handed me his phone. My eyes scanned the blurry but readable images. They weren't mere lease amendments. They were meticulously drafted legal documents, transferring all rental authority and, most alarmingly, power of attorney for the building to Bethany Vance, effective upon Arthur's death. She had systematically, subtly, and criminally seized control. A cold certainty settled in my gut. Bethany wasn't just stealing rent, she was orchestrating a complete takeover. She was creating a legal framework to control the entire building, to evict Lucas, and then, likely, to claim mismanagement of Arthur's estate to challenge the will, arguing that the building was a financial drain, and that the only logical step was to sell it, transferring the inheritance and its proceeds directly to Daniel, and thus into her greedy hands. It was a perfectly executed long-term plan. "She's been planning this for years," Lucas stated, his voice now grim, the innocence fading from his eyes, replaced by a steely resolve. "She has," I confirmed, remembering Arthur's initial heart problems, the first signs of his decline. "She started collecting rent and presumably drafting these documents when Arthur first began showing serious health issues. She was bleeding the building dry, Lucas, making it look unprofitable, a liability, while simultaneously painting me as a cruel or incompetent manager if I ever questioned anything." Just then my phone vibrated loudly on the table. It was Daniel. His voice was urgent, panicked. "Mom, where are you?" he burst out without even a greeting. "Joy's gone. She left early this morning with a suitcase and a bunch of files from Dad's office. The office in our house, the one he kept locked." My blood ran cold. Joy. Bethany's confidant, her shadow. This was no accident. "Which files, Daniel?" I demanded, my voice sharp. "Be specific." "The building deed for the Riverside Apartments," he rattled off, his voice strained. "All the old rental agreements, the financial ledgers, everything related to that property." He sounded utterly distraught. "She cleared it out, Mom. It's all gone." "She's running," I said to Lucas, the words hanging heavy in the quiet coffee shop. Bethany and Joy were attempting to abscond with the evidence, to disappear with their ill-gotten gains before we could fully expose them. "Daniel," I instructed, my mind already racing, formulating a plan. "I need you to take pictures of what's left. Anything. Every empty drawer, every missing folder. Document everything." Then I added, "I'm coming over, and I'm bringing someone with me, someone you need to meet." I disconnected the call, my gaze meeting Lucas's. His face was a mixture of shock, betrayal, and a flicker of something new. Hope. As we drove toward Daniel's house, the silence in the car was heavy, but no longer uncomfortable. "I've been waiting my whole life to meet my family," Lucas admitted, his voice soft, almost vulnerable. Real family. His green eyes, so like Arthur's, but filled with a genuine warmth Arthur had seemingly lacked, met mine in the rearview mirror. In that moment, a new purpose solidified within me. This was no longer just about Arthur's betrayal or Bethany's theft. It was about forging a new family, a true family from the ashes of lies and deceit. It was about righting wrongs, not just for myself, but for Lucas, for Daniel, and for the possibility of a future built on truth. The drive to Daniel's house felt charged with an almost electric tension. Lucas sat beside me, quiet but alert, the weight of a lifetime of questions finally on the verge of being answered, or at least acknowledged. I glanced at him, at the set of his jaw, the familiar green of his eyes, and a new wave of protective resolve washed over me. He was family, irrevocably so, and I would fight for him. Daniel opened the door, his face still pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. His gaze immediately fell on Lucas, and his jaw dropped. "Jesus," he breathed, the word escaping him in a shocked whisper. "You look just like Dad." The resemblance, stark in the unforgiving light of the porch, was undeniable. It wasn't just the eyes, it was the bone structure, the slight curve of the mouth, an echo of Arthur in his younger days. Lucas offered a small, hesitant smile. "You look like him too," he replied softly, his gaze meeting Daniel's, around the eyes. In that moment, two strangers, bound by blood and betrayal, recognized a shared lineage that transcended years of secrecy. Daniel, I said, stepping forward, placing a hand on my stepson's arm. This is Lucas, your half-brother. The words felt heavy, momentous, but they were true. Daniel's eyes, still wide, flickered from Lucas to me, then back to Lucas. There was no denial, only a profound, silent acknowledgement of the truth. He extended a hand, and Lucas shook it, a tentative connection forming between them. We moved into the living room, a space that only hours before had been filled with hushed revelations. Lucas immediately pulled out his phone, showing Daniel the photos of the fraudulent lease amendments Bethany had tricked him into signing. As Daniel scrolled through them, his expression hardened, a deep anger replacing his initial shock. She used Arthur's sickness, Daniel, I explained, to gain control. She was bleeding the building dry, making it look like a worthless asset while pocketing the rent for 8 years. She was setting you up, making it seem like I was the one manipulating Arthur, trying to discredit me so she could control everything through you. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a sound of frustration escaping him. God, Mom, he muttered, I feel like such an idiot. She was always so convincing. She had an answer for everything. The weight of his own gullibility pressed down on him, mingling with the shock of his father's secret son and his wife's blatant criminality. Just then, Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his face tightening further. It's Bethany, he announced. He showed us the screen. A text message. Family emergency. Won't be back for a few days. Don't worry about anything. She's running, I stated, the words devoid of emotion. A cold certainty. She's buying herself time. Before we could strategize further, Lucas's phone rang. He looked at the caller ID, his brow furrowed. It's Clara Jones, he said, answering, from Riverside Property Management. He listened for a moment, his expression darkening. My lease is terminated, due to non-payment. He looked at me, bewildered. I have no record of you ever paying rent, Mr. Miller. Clara's tinny voice was audible even from a distance. Ms. Vance, as the authorized property manager, informed us of your prolonged delinquency. The eviction notice stands, effective today. My cold fury intensified. Bethany hadn't just stolen the money, she was actively trying to kick Lucas out, erasing him completely. I snatched the phone from Lucas. This is Eleanor Vance, I announced, my voice sharp, authoritative. I am the owner of the Riverside Apartments, and those documents are fraudulent. Lucas Miller is not being evicted. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end. I say, Vance, Clara replied, her voice now defensive. My records clearly show Bethany Vance as the authorized manager, with full power of attorney as of 3 days before your husband's passing. If you have proof of ownership, I suggest you bring it to our office first thing tomorrow morning. The audacity of Bethany's preemptive strike, even as she was fleeing, was staggering. She had orchestrated this perfectly, tying up loose ends, creating a paper trail that made her the rightful authority. But she had gravely underestimated my resolve, my determination to protect my family, especially Lucas. The next morning, armed with the original building deed, Arthur's death certificate, his will leaving everything to me, in a fresh surge of determination, I stood alongside Lucas and Daniel in Clara Jones's office. Clara, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, eyed us warily. I understand your claims, Miss Vance, Clara began, but I have here a perfectly legal power of attorney signed by Arthur Vance, dated 3 days before his passing, naming Bethany Vance as the sole authorized manager of the Riverside Apartments. She pushed a document across her desk, triumph in her gaze. My heart sank for a moment. 3 days before Arthur died, he had been heavily sedated, barely conscious. Bethany had exploited his vulnerability, twisting his final moments into a weapon. But Lucas was ready. He laid the bank statements and deposit slips on Clara's desk. These are the payments I've been making for 8 years, he stated, his voice calm but firm, all deposited into Bethany Vance's personal account. Clara's eyes widened as she scanned the documents. The color drained from her face. This is fraud, she whispered, her professional composure cracking. Financial fraud on a significant scale. Then Daniel, with a new sense of purpose, pulled out his phone, displaying the photos of the fraudulent lease amendments Lucas had been tricked into signing. And these are the documents Bethany pressured Lucas to sign, he explained, pointing out the subtle changes, the hidden clauses transferring authority. Clara stared at the screen, her mouth agape. "This isn't just fraud," she finally declared, her voice now filled with outrage. "This is forgery. This is criminal." She immediately picked up her phone. "I need to call our legal department and the police." Our immediate crisis was averted, but Bethany was still out there, with our documents and potentially planning her next move. "We need to find her," I said, my voice resolute, "before she disappears completely." Lucas, always observant, offered a practical suggestion. "She didn't take her own car. She must have hired a car service to the bus or train station." He pulled out his phone and started searching. Within minutes, he found a record for Bethany Vance, showing a payment for a taxi to the bus depot with a ticket purchased for Sacramento. "Sacramento?" Daniel questioned, confused. "Why Sacramento?" Lucas's eyes narrowed. "The county records office. If she's planning on forging property transfer documents, she'd need to go there to try and file them, to make her claim seem legitimate." "Then that's where we're going," I declared, a steely resolve in my voice. The hunt was on. The three of us immediately headed for Sacramento, a united front against Bethany's deceit, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The drive to Sacramento was a blur of highway and simmering anticipation. My heart pounded with a mix of fury and resolve. Lucas, quiet beside me, occasionally checked his phone for updates, while Daniel in the back seat was a coiled spring of nervous energy. We pulled into the bustling parking lot of the Sacramento County Records Office, a nondescript building that now held the potential for both justice and further heartbreak. Inside, the vast hall buzzed with the murmur of conversations and the rustle of papers. My eyes scanned the rows of desks until I spotted her. Bethany, her back was to us, her usually impeccably styled blonde hair now a choppy, darker brown. She hunched over a desk, conferring with a clerk, a stack of documents before her. She was attempting to transfer ownership of the Riverside Apartments to Daniel, with herself as the managing agent. A transparent move to solidify her control and then, undoubtedly, disappear with the proceeds. Taking a deep breath, I walked towards her, Lucas and Daniel following closely behind. The moment felt surreal, the culmination of weeks of emotional upheaval and startling revelations. "Hello, Bethany," I said, my voice calm but firm, cutting through the low hum of the office. She spun around, her face instantly draining of color. Her eyes, wide with shock, registered my presence. Then Lucas's, then Daniel's. The carefully constructed facade of the last few weeks crumbled, revealing the fear beneath. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Surprised to see me?" I continued, stepping closer. "Or perhaps surprised to see Lucas Miller, the tenant from apartment 4B. I paused, letting the name sink in. "The one you've been collecting rent from for 8 years. $76,800 to be exact." Bethany's composure snapped. "That money was rightfully Daniel's," she hissed, her voice low but venomous, a stark contrast to the quiet dignity of the office. "Everything Arthur owned should have gone to his real son, not some gold-digging widow who manipulated a sick old man." Her eyes flashed, the anger replacing her fear. I pulled Lucas's birth certificate from my purse, holding it up for her to see. "You see this, Bethany?" I asked, my voice edged with a chilling calm. "This is Lucas James Miller's birth certificate. And right here, under father's name, it says Arthur James Vance, my husband, your husband's father. Lucas is Arthur's biological son." Her eyes darted to the document, then to Lucas, then back to the paper. A flicker of disbelief, then a dawning horror crossed her face. She had been so consumed by her own greed, so blinded by her manufactured narrative of me being the greedy old woman, that she hadn't even realized the true identity of the man she had been stealing from. "You've been stealing from Arthur's son for 8 years, Bethany," I concluded, the weight of the truth in my words, "and you didn't even know he was family." Just then, Daniel stepped forward, his face etched with disgust. "Bethany, what the hell are you doing?" he demanded, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and profound disappointment. She turned to him, her eyes pleading, desperately trying to regain control. Daniel, I was protecting us, protecting our family. She was going to take everything. Protecting us, Daniel scoffed, his voice rising. By stealing money from my father's son? By trying to declare my own father incompetent? By trying to forge documents and disappear? You lied to me, Bethany. You stole from me, from Lucas, from Eleanor. You tried to destroy everything. Lucas, who had stood silently until now, stepped forward, his green eyes fixed on Bethany. Who collected my rent money? He asked, his voice cutting through the tension. While letting my landlord think I was a deadbeat? Bethany's desperation morphed into pure spite. Her gaze, filled with venom, landed on Lucas. You're nothing, she spat, her voice laced with contempt. A mistake. You don't belong in this family. Yes, he does, Daniel stated firmly, stepping to stand shoulder to shoulder with Lucas. He's my brother. The declaration hung in the air, a powerful testament to a newly forged bond. Just as two security guards, alerted by the raised voices, began to approach, I pulled out my phone. And just so you know, Bethany, I said, my voice resonating with finality, I've been recording this entire conversation. Every admission, every lie. Her face went white again, the last spark of defiance extinguished by the undeniable evidence. 6 months later, justice had been served. Bethany Vance was sentenced to 3 years in prison for fraud and embezzlement, along with an order for full restitution of the $76,800 she had stolen from Lucas. The legal battle had been arduous, painful even, but necessary. In the aftermath, the Riverside Apartments, once a symbol of Arthur's deceit and Bethany's greed, began its transformation. Lucas, with his electrician's license, spearheaded the renovations, pouring his heart and soul into the building that was now truly his. Daniel, using his business acumen, helped manage the administrative side, ensuring the building was brought up to code and made profitable. Together, they turned a decaying property into a vibrant, thriving community. The inheritance was restructured. As Arthur's biological son, Lucas received half ownership of the Riverside Apartments. I retained my full ownership of Arthur's other assets, but the building's profits were split 3 ways, between Lucas, Daniel, and me. It was a fair and equitable solution, a new beginning built on transparency and mutual respect. One evening I hosted a dinner, a small, intimate gathering at my home. Lucas brought Isabella Santos, Sophia's sister, a warm, vibrant woman who embraced Lucas with tears in her eyes. Isabella gave Lucas a small, tarnished silver locket that had belonged to Sophia. Inside, a tiny, faded picture of a young Sophia. Isabella shared stories of his mother, tales of her resilience and joy, and a heartbreaking detail. Sophia had never stopped believing Arthur would one day return for her and their son. It was a painful reminder of Arthur's enduring cruelty, but it also filled a void in Lucas's understanding of his own history. New family dinners became a regular occurrence. Daniel, Lucas, Isabella, and me. Our table, once a silent monument to Arthur's absence, now buzzed with laughter, shared stories, and the forging of new memories. Lucas, in a symbolic act of taking control of his identity, announced his intention to legally change his name to Peterson Hartwell, honoring a cherished foster parent who had provided him with stability in his youth. Later, he would decide to also adopt Vance as a middle name, acknowledging his biological father, but on his own terms. A letter arrived from Bethany, from prison. It was short, handwritten, and surprisingly contrite. She admitted she was wrong, that her greed had consumed her, and expressed a faint hope that our new family would find happiness. It was a small, unexpected step towards healing, a testament to the idea that even the most broken bonds could begin to mend. A year after the chaos, we gathered on the newly renovated rooftop garden of the Riverside Apartments. The air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers and fresh paint. Lucas, now Lucas Peterson Hartwell Vance, stood beaming as we celebrated the official adoption of his new name. I raised a toast, my voice filled with emotion. Arthur made many mistakes in his life, and he carried a terrible secret, I began, my gaze sweeping over Daniel, Lucas, and Isabella. But from his mistakes, a new family has emerged. A chosen family, forged not by obligation, but by truth, forgiveness, and the incredible strength of second chances. I looked at Daniel, then at Lucas. I commit to loving you both unconditionally. Our family, now whole, now honest, is worth everything we'd been through. The journey had been arduous, filled with pain and betrayal, but in the end, we had not only found justice, but we had found each other.